You know, when you get to be my age, 62 years old with hands that shake when it's cold and knees that creak like old floorboards, you think life's done throwing curveballs at you. But honey, let me tell you something about life in Cedar Falls, Iowa. This town of 23,000 souls, where everybody knows your business before you even know it yourself. Sometimes the past don't stay buried where you left it. And Lord help me, I learned that the hard way on my birthday morning. My name's Clara Mitchell, and I've been living in this same house on Maple Street for 41 years now, watching the seasons change through the same kitchen window, listening to the church bells from First Presbyterian every Sunday morning, smelling the fresh bread from Henderson's Bakery when the wind blows just right. Used to share this place with my Samuel, but that's a story that'll twist your heart in ways you can't imagine. And I'm going to tell you every last bit of it, even the parts that still make my chest tight when I think about them. See? I was just shuffling to the front door that morning, wearing my old flannel robe that's got more holes than fabric at this point, when I spotted it. A plain white envelope, no stamp, no return address, just my name written in that slanted handwriting that made my blood run cold as January creek water. My hands, they started trembling something fierce, and it wasn't from the arthritis this time. That handwriting, Lord have mercy, I'd know it anywhere, even after 18 years of thinking the man who wrote it was fish food at the bottom of Willow Lake. I stood there in my doorway, feeling the weight of every single one of my years, holding that envelope like it might explode, while Mrs. Patterson across the street pretended to water her petunias, even though we both knew she was watching me through her curtains. That's when I realized, some secrets, they don't die when you bury them. They just wait underground like seeds, ready to sprout when you least expect it, and mine was about to bloom into something that would change everything I thought I knew about love, loss, and the lies we tell ourselves to survive. If you want to know what was in that envelope and why it turned my whole world upside down after all these years, well, honey, stick around, hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because what I've kept hidden all this time is gonna blow your mind. Well, honey, let me tell you what was in that envelope, because even now, months later, my hands still shake when I think about it. I sat down at my kitchen table, the same one where Samuel used to grade his biology papers while I made dinner, and I tore open that envelope like ripping off a bandage, quick, before I lost my nerve. Inside was just a regular old birthday card. You know the kind you buy at the dollar store when you forget someone's special day, with some generic flowers on the front, and happy birthday in fancy letters that don't mean nothing. But when I opened it up, Lord have mercy, my heart just about stopped beating right there in my chest. There it was, in Samuel's handwriting, that same slanted script he used to write grocery lists and love notes with, and it said, "Happy birthday, Clara. I'm still here. Check the cellar." Just like that, casual as you please, like he hadn't been declared dead 18 years ago, like I hadn't stood at an empty memorial service crying my eyes out while folks patted my shoulder and told me how sorry they were for my loss. You gotta understand something about that June day in 2005 when Samuel disappeared. It broke me in ways I still ain't fully put back together. The police found his car by Willow Lake, keys still in the ignition, wallet on the dashboard, his favorite jacket folded neat on the passenger seat like he was planning to come back for it. They dragged that lake for 2 weeks, had divers and everything, while I sat on my porch swing praying to hear his footsteps on the gravel driveway just one more time. But all they found was mud and old fishing lures, and eventually Sheriff Coleman came to my door with his hat in his hands and that look on his face that said without words that my husband was gone. The thing is, looking back now with eyes that seen too much, there were signs something wasn't right in our marriage long before he vanished. We'd been together 22 years by then, raised our daughter Lila in this house, went to church potlucks and school plays like any normal couple in Cedar Falls. But that last year, Samuel started taking these long walks at night, said he needed to clear his head after dealing with teenagers all day at the high school. He'd come back smelling like the night air and something else I couldn't quite place, and when I'd ask where he'd been, he'd just kiss my forehead and say, "Just walking, Clara, just walking." And then there was Lila's college graduation party. Lord, that still stings to remember. We threw it right here in the backyard, had half the town over, strung up lights in the oak tree and everything. I was so proud, bustling around making sure everyone had enough potato salad and sweet tea. when I heard Samuel talking to some of his teacher friends near the garage. One of them asked about our summer plans, and Samuel, he laughed this laugh I'd never heard before and said, "Oh, you'd have to ask the wife about that. I'm just along for the ride." The wife. Not Clara, not my wife, just the wife, like I was some piece of furniture he'd gotten stuck with. That cut deeper than any knife could, and when I looked at him across that crowded yard, it was like looking at a stranger wearing my husband's face. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for what that birthday card meant. Check the cellar. Those 3 words sat in my stomach like stones. See, our cellar had always been Samuel's domain, where he kept his teaching supplies and old textbooks, where he'd disappear to when he said he needed to work on lesson plans. After he died, or after I thought he died, I couldn't bear to go down there. Just closed the door and pretended it didn't exist, like if I didn't look at his things, maybe the pain would fade faster. 18 years I avoided that cellar. 18 years of walking past that door every day and feeling my chest tighten up. But now here I was, 62 years old, holding proof that my dead husband wasn't dead at all, and he wanted me to go rooting around in the very place I'd been avoiding since the day he left me. The worst part? Part of me. The stupid part that still remembered how he used to dance with me in the kitchen while dinner cooked. That part wanted to run down those stairs right that minute. But the other part, the part that had learned to live with grief like an old companion, that part was terrified of what I might find down there in the dark, and that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks. If Samuel was alive, if he'd been alive all these years while I mourned him, while I wore black to his memorial, while I cried myself to sleep for months, well, honey, that meant everything I thought I knew about our life together was a lie. And the cellar, whatever was waiting for me down there, that was going to show me just how big of a fool I'd been. And folks, let me tell you, when you're my age and you realize you've been played for a fool by the man you loved more than life itself, well, that's when everything starts to unravel, and I mean everything. You know what's funny about fear? It can make a grown woman stand at the top of her own cellar stairs for 3 whole days, staring at that door like it might bite her. That's exactly what I did after getting Samuel's card. Just circled around that cellar door like a scared cat, making excuses about why I couldn't go down there just yet. Had to do the laundry, had to call Lila. She's living in Portland now, studying octopuses or some such thing for her doctorate. Had to make sure Mrs. Henderson got her heart medication from the pharmacy. Any excuse to avoid facing whatever truth was hiding in that darkness. But on the 4th morning, with rain pattering against the windows and the whole house smelling like the lavender tea I'd made to calm my nerves, I finally grabbed Samuel's old flashlight from the junk drawer and made my way down those creaky wooden steps. Each step felt like a betrayal to the woman I'd been for 18 years, the widow who'd learned to sleep on the left side of the bed because the right side still smelled like him for months after he disappeared. The cellar was exactly like I remembered, but somehow different too, like looking at a photograph that's been left in the sun too long. Dust motes danced in the flashlight beam, and there were his boxes of teaching supplies, his old microscope on the shelf, even that ugly green armchair he'd rescued from a garage sale and insisted on keeping down here for his thinking time. Everything covered in dust thick as winter wool except for one corner, near the old water heater, where the dust had been disturbed, where someone had clearly been moving things around. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears as I made my way to that corner, and that's when I saw it. A section of the wood paneling that didn't quite match the rest, just a shade lighter like it had been added later. I ran my fingers along the edges, and Lord help me, it moved. Behind that panel was a metal box, the kind you'd keep important documents in, and my hands shook so bad I nearly dropped it pulling it out. Inside that box, honey, was a whole other life. Photos of Samuel. My Samuel, the man I'd made love to for 22 years, who'd held my hand through my mother's funeral, who'd danced with Lila on her wedding day that never came because she was too focused on her career. But in these pictures, he was standing in front of a house I'd never seen, with his arm around a woman who wasn't me. There were kids in some of the photos, too, a boy and a girl, maybe 8 and 10 years old, and they were all smiling like a real family on Christmas morning. But that wasn't even the worst part. No, The worst part was the documents underneath those photos. A driver's license with Samuel's face, but the name Daniel Harper from Thornton, Colorado. Birth certificates for those kids, listing Daniel Harper as the father. Marriage certificate dated 2007, 2 years after he'd supposedly drowned himself in Willow Lake, between Daniel Harper and someone named Rebecca Walsh. And letters, Lord have mercy, love letters between Samuel and this Rebecca, talking about their life together, their plans for the future, how happy he was to finally be free. Free. That word hit me like a slap across the face. Free from what? From me? From our life? From Lila? I sank down onto that ugly green chair, not caring about the dust, and read every single document in that box while tears ran down my face like spring rain. My Samuel, the man who'd promised before God and everybody to love me till death do us part, had just decided one day that death was too permanent and disappearing was easier. The strangest thing was finding a letter addressed to me, sealed but never sent, dated just a month before he vanished. I opened it with trembling fingers, and his handwriting, that same slanted script that used to leave me grocery lists and love notes, spelled out the kind of truth that breaks a person. Clara, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Not dead, just gone. I've met someone who makes me remember who I used to be before Cedar Falls, before the routine of grading papers and PTA meetings and pretending that teaching biology to bored teenagers is enough. You're a good woman, better than I deserve, but I can't breathe here anymore. I'm suffocating in this life we built, and if I stay, I'll die inside. I know you'll hate me for this, and you have every right. But please know that our years together weren't all a lie. I did love you. I just loved myself more. I sat in that cellar for hours, reading and rereading everything, trying to make sense of how the man who'd cried at our wedding could be the same one who'd faked his death rather than ask for a divorce. The rain kept falling outside, and I kept discovering new layers to his deception. Bank statements for accounts I never knew existed, a passport with his new name, even a business card. Apparently Daniel Harper was a successful real estate agent in Colorado, probably charming families into buying houses with the same smile he'd used to charm me into believing we'd grow old together. When I finally climbed back up those stairs, my knees creaking worse than ever, I wasn't the same woman who'd gone down. See, for 18 years, I'd been Clara the widow, the poor thing whose husband killed himself, the woman who kept his memory alive with photos on the mantel and stories about what a good man he'd been. But now I was Clara the fool, the woman whose husband had been living his best life in Colorado while she'd been sleeping alone, talking to his photograph, visiting an empty grave on what would have been their anniversary. And honey, let me tell you, being a fool hurts worse than being a widow, because at least when you're grieving something real. When you're a fool, you're grieving a fiction, and that's a special kind of hell that nobody prepares you for. Now, honey, let me tell you what happens when 18 years of grief turns into rage. It ain't pretty, but Lord knows it's powerful. I spent that whole night after finding Samuel's box sitting at my kitchen table, drinking coffee strong enough to wake the dead, though apparently not strong enough to keep certain husbands from playing dead, and just letting that anger build up inside me like a summer storm. You ever been so mad you could taste it? That's where I was. And baby, it tasted like copper pennies and broken promises. First thing I did come morning was call my daughter Lila out in Portland. Now, I hadn't told her nothing about the birthday card yet. Figured I needed to know what I was dealing with first. But when I heard her voice on the phone, all cheerful talking about her octopuses and how smart they are, something just broke inside me. Baby, I said, your daddy ain't dead. He's living in Colorado with a whole new family. The silence on the other end of that phone lasted so long, I thought we'd been disconnected. Then she said, real quiet like, Mama, what are you talking about? So I told her everything, and let me tell you, that girl's got her mama's temper when she gets riled up. She wanted to drive down from Portland right that minute, but I told her no, not yet. See, I was starting to think clear for the first time in days, and I knew I needed to be smart about this. Samuel, or Daniel, or whatever the hell he was calling himself, he'd had 18 years to build his new life. I wasn't going to go charging in there like some crazy old woman without a plan. That's when I remembered Diane Foster. You probably know her, or someone like her. Every small town's got one. She's the lady who knows everybody's business. Used to be a legal secretary before she retired. Sharp as a tack and nosier than a bloodhound. Diane also happened to be my second cousin, and more importantly, she had a nephew who was a private investigator down in Des Moines. I called her up, asked if she could come over for coffee, and when she showed up 20 minutes later, that woman never could resist a good story. I laid everything out on the table. Literally. All them documents, the photos, the whole mess. Diane looked through everything, with those reading glasses perched on her nose, making little sounds that got louder and angrier as she went. When she finished, she looked at me over those glasses and said, "Clara May Mitchell, that son of a bitch played you for a fool, and we're gonna nail his ass to the wall." Now Diane don't usually curse, being a good Methodist and all, so I knew she was serious as a heart attack. Her nephew Jake turned out to be exactly what I needed. A young man who knew his way around computers and databases and all that modern stuff I don't understand. Within a week, he'd found out more about Daniel Harper than I'd known about Samuel Mitchell in 22 years of marriage. Turns out, my supposedly dead husband owned a real estate company, had a LinkedIn profile talking about his passion for helping families find their dream homes, and, this one really burned my biscuits, was the president of his local church council. The man who'd walked out on his actual family was playing Father of the Year in Thornton, Colorado. But here's where it gets interesting. Sugar. While Jake was digging into Samuel's new life, I was going through our old one with a fine-tooth comb, found things I'd missed before, or maybe just didn't want to see. Credit card statements with charges from hotels I'd never been to. Phone bills with numbers that didn't belong to nobody I knew. Even found a letter from a woman named Rebecca. Yeah, the same Rebecca he married. Tucked inside one of his teaching manuals, dated 3 months before he disappeared. She was thanking him for the wonderful weekend and saying how she couldn't wait until they could be together without all the complications. The more I learned, the less I recognized the man I'd been married to. It was like peeling an onion, layer after layer of lies, and every one of them made my eyes water. But I wasn't crying from sadness no more. No, sir. I was crying from pure, righteous anger. The kind of anger that makes you clean your whole house at 2 a.m, that makes you throw out every single thing that reminds you of someone, that makes you realize you're stronger than you ever thought possible. I started making lists of every lie he'd told, every dollar he'd stolen from our joint accounts before he left, every birthday and anniversary I'd spent alone thinking he was dead. I consulted with a lawyer, not the one here in Cedar Falls who'd gone to high school with Samuel, but a sharp young woman from Des Moines who specialized in cases like mine. Turns out, pretending to be dead while you're actually living under a false identity is all kinds of illegal. Who knew? The funny thing is, the more I prepared to fight back, the more alive I felt. For 18 years, I'd been walking around like a ghost myself, just going through the motions. But now I had a purpose. I started dressing nicer, not for anybody else, but for me. Started tending my garden again, the one I'd let go to weeds after Samuel left. Even signed up for that water aerobics class at the Y that my friend Marge had been trying to get me to join for years. And you know what else I did? I wrote Samuel a letter. Not to send, not yet anyway, but just to get it all out. Told him exactly what I thought of him and his new life, used words that would make a sailor blush. Told him about every single night I'd cried myself to sleep. Every time I'd had to explain to Lila why her daddy wasn't coming home. Every pitying look I'd endured from folks in town who thought I was the poor widow whose husband couldn't face life no more. By the time I finished that letter, it was 4 pages long, and my hand was cramping something fierce. But honey, I felt like I'd lost 50 pounds. All that grief I'd been carrying around. It wasn't gone exactly, but it had changed into something else. Something with teeth. Something that was going to make damn sure Samuel Mitchell learned that you can't just throw away 22 years of marriage like yesterday's newspaper and expect to get away with it. No, sir. Not on my watch. Well, sugar, let me tell you about the morning I decided to stop being mad and start being smart. It was one of them September mornings when the air's so crisp you can taste fall coming, and I was sitting on my porch swing with my coffee, watching the leaves start to turn on that big oak tree Samuel had planted for our 10th anniversary. Funny how even the good memories can stab you when you find out they were all built on quicksand. That's when Jake, the private investigator, called with news that knocked me sideways. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, all professional-like, "I found something interesting. Your husband tried to contact your daughter 3 months ago." I nearly dropped my coffee mug right there on the porch. "What do you mean, tried to contact her?" I asked, my voice shaking like leaves in a storm. Turns out Samuel, calling himself Daniel Harper of course, had sent Lila a LinkedIn message saying he was a family friend who knew her parents back in Iowa and wanted to connect about some important family history. Thank the good Lord, Lila's smart as a whip and suspicious as her mama. She'd ignored the message, thinking it was some kind of scam. But when I called her and told her about this, she went quiet for a long minute, then said, "Mama, I got another message last week. Same person. This time he said he had information about Dad." My blood ran cold as December ice. That man was trying to worm his way back into our lives, and I'd be damned if I was going to let him hurt my baby girl again. That's when I made my decision. No more sitting around feeling sorry for myself. No more just gathering information like I was writing a book report. It was time to act. I called Diane and told her to set up a meeting with her lawyer niece for that very afternoon. Then I did something I hadn't done in 18 years. I went down to the cellar again, but this time I wasn't scared. This time I was on a mission. I spent 3 hours down there, going through every box, every shelf, every corner. Found more than just that hidden panel, too. Behind the water heater, there was a manila envelope with cash in it, $5,000 in $100 bills. Under the workbench, a cell phone I'd never seen before. One of them old flip phones from 2005. And in a box marked tax returns, I found the mother lode, copies of emails between him and Rebecca going back 2 years before he disappeared, talking about their plan and how they just needed to be patient. But here's the kicker, honey. In one of them emails, dated just a week before he vanished, Samuel wrote, "The hardest part will be the memorial service. Clara will insist on one, even without a body. I hate putting her through that, but it's necessary for this to work." Necessary. Like my grief was just an inconvenience in his grand plan. I had to sit down on them cellar steps and take deep breaths to keep from screaming loud enough to wake the dead. The actual dead, not the fake ones. When I met with the lawyer that afternoon, a sharp young thing named Jessica who wore power suits and had a handshake that could crack walnuts, I laid everything out like a poker hand. She looked through all the documents, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, and when she looked up at me, she had this little smile that reminded me of a cat that spotted a mouse. "Mrs. Mitchell," she said, "your husband committed fraud, identity theft, bigamy since he never divorced you, and about 6 other crimes I can think of off the top of my head. We're going to nail him to the wall." But then she said something that made me think. "The question is," she said, leaning back in her chair, "what do you want out of this? Do you want him in jail? Do you want money? Do you want to destroy his new life? Because we can do any or all of those things." And you know what? I didn't have an answer right then. For weeks I'd been running on pure anger, but now that I had to think about what I actually wanted, I wasn't sure. That night, I called Lila and we talked for 3 hours. She was angry, sure, but she was also hurt in ways that made my mama heart ache. "I spent years in therapy thinking I'd done something to make him want to die," she told me, her voice thick with tears. "I thought maybe if I'd been a better daughter, if I'd gotten better grades, if I'd been more like what he wanted, maybe he wouldn't have left us." That's when I knew what I wanted. I wanted Samuel to face what he'd done to us, to look us in the eye and see the damage he'd caused. So I made a decision that probably sounds crazy, but honey, when you get to be my age, you learn that sometimes crazy is just another word for brave. I decided I was going to go to Colorado, not to make a scene, not to show up on his doorstep screaming like some woman scorned on a daytime talk show. No, I was going to be smarter than that. I was going to do reconnaissance, like them soldiers in the movies. I was going to see this new life he'd built with my own eyes, and then I was going to decide exactly how to tear it all down. I started making plans that very night. Told Diane I was going to visit my sister in Denver, which wasn't a complete lie, since my sister Ruthie did live there, even though we hadn't talked in 2 years after that fight about Mama's china. Booked myself a flight for the following week, made a reservation at a modest hotel in Thornton, and even bought myself some new clothes. Nothing fancy, just some nice slacks and blouses that made me look like a respectable woman traveling to see family, not a scorned wife planning revenge. The morning before I left, I stood in front of the mirror in my bedroom, our bedroom, the one where Samuel used to leave his socks on the floor and steal all the covers, and I looked at myself real hard. 62 years old, gray hair I'd stopped coloring after he died, lines around my eyes from years of squinting at the sun and crying at the memories. But you know what I saw? I saw a woman who'd survived 18 years of a lie, who'd raised a brilliant daughter mostly on her own, who'd kept going when she thought her heart was buried at the bottom of Willow Lake. And that woman, honey, she was stronger than anything Samuel Mitchell or Daniel Harper could throw at her. Sugar, let me tell you about flying for the first time in 20 years. There I was, clutching my purse like it might run away, sitting in that airplane seat, trying not to think about how Samuel used to hold my hand during takeoff. The lady next to me probably thought I was some nervous old bird, kept asking if I was all right. Just fine, hun, I told her, just going to see family. Which was true, in a twisted sort of way. I was going to see the family my husband chose over the one he'd made with me. Landing in Denver, renting a car with one of them GPS things that talks to you. Lord, that took some getting used to. And driving to Thornton, my hands were steady as a surgeon's. Funny how anger can cure all kinds of shaking. I'd studied the map Jake had sent me, memorized the route to Samuel's real estate office, his house, even his church. Felt like some kind of spy in one of them movies Lila used to watch. Except I was wearing sensible shoes and had a bottle of Tums in my purse. The first place I went was his office. Harper and Associates Real Estate, the sign said, all professional and proud. I parked across the street at a little coffee shop, ordered myself a cup of tea, and just watched. And then, at 11:47 in the morning on a Tuesday in September, I saw him. My dead husband walked out of that office building like he didn't have a care in the world, wearing a suit I'd never seen, laughing with some younger man in a tie. His hair was different, shorter, with some gray at the temples he used to dye back in Cedar Falls. But it was him, Samuel, alive as you and me. Honey, I can't explain what it feels like to see your dead husband walking around healthy as a horse. My heart did this funny thing where it tried to be happy and furious at the same time, and I had to grip that teacup so hard I thought it might shatter. He looked good, healthy, prosperous, happy. That's what burned the most. He looked happy in a way I hadn't seen in our last years together. Like shedding his old life, shedding me, had taken 50 pounds off his shoulders. I followed them, Lord forgive me, I actually followed my own husband like some private detective, to a restaurant few blocks away. One of them fancy lunch places with cloth napkins and waiters who tell you about specials like they're reading poetry. I got a table in the corner where I could see him but he couldn't see me, ordered a salad I didn't want, and just watched him living his life. Watched him check his phone, probably for messages from Rebecca. Watched him laugh at something his colleague said. Watched him be Daniel Harper, successful realtor, instead of Samuel Mitchell, the biology teacher who'd apparently felt like he was drowning in our life together. After lunch, I did something that probably crossed a line, but honey, when your dead husband ain't dead, all the lines are already blurry. I followed him to his house. It was nice, real nice. 2-story colonial, with a perfect lawn, and one of them decorative flags hanging by the door that said, "Bless this home." I parked down the street and just stared at it. This was where he lived now, where he came home to Rebecca instead of me, where he played daddy to kids that weren't Lila, where he'd built a whole life on the foundation of my grief. That's when she came out. Rebecca. I recognized her from the photos, though she looked older now, early 40s maybe, with blonde hair pulled back in one of them yoga ponytails. She was carrying grocery bags, and Daniel, whatever, he rushed out to help her, kissing her cheek in the driveway for all the world to see. Just a normal suburban couple living their normal suburban life, except the husband was supposed to be fish food in Iowa. I sat in that rental car for 3 hours, watching their life like it was a TV show. Kids came home from school. The boy looked about 13 now, all gangly limbs and 2 big feet, and the girl was probably 11, carrying a violin case. They all went inside together, and I could see through the windows as they moved around, probably doing homework, making dinner, being a family. The family Samuel had wanted more than the one he'd had with me. That night, back in my hotel room, I cried like I hadn't cried since the day they told me he was gone. But these weren't sad tears, honey. These were angry tears, the kind that burn on the way out. I'd spent 18 years mourning a man who was living his best life just a few states away. 18 years of widow's weeds while he was playing husband of the year. 18 years of Lila thinking her daddy couldn't face life anymore, while he was coaching Little League or whatever with his new son. I called Jessica, the lawyer, right then and there. I saw him, I said. I saw his house, his wife, his kids, his whole damn life. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Good. Document everything. Take pictures if you can. We're building a case and every detail matters." So that's what I did. Turned my hurt into something useful. Started taking notes about everything. The house address, the cars in the driveway, even the name of the kid's school I saw on the boy's backpack. But the real kicker came the next day. See, I'd found out from Jake that Samuel went to Thornton Presbyterian Church every Sunday, even served on some committees. So Wednesday night, I dolled myself up nice, not too fancy, just respectable, and went to their weekly fellowship dinner. Told folks I was visiting from Iowa, looking for a church home while I stayed with my sister. Everyone was so welcoming, especially when I mentioned I was a widow. Church folks always have a soft spot for widows. And then someone said, "Oh, you should meet Daniel Harper. He lost his first wife too before he met Rebecca. He's such an inspiration about starting over after loss." I nearly choked on my green bean casserole. His first wife. That would be me, honey. The wife who was apparently dead in his new history. I managed to smile and nod, but inside I was seething. Bad enough he'd left me. Now he was killing me off in his cover story. That's when I saw my opportunity. One of the church ladies, a chatty thing named Doris, mentioned they were having a bake sale that weekend to raise money for the youth group. "I make a mean apple pie," I said, "sweet as sugar. Been making them for church bake sales back home for 40 years. Would y'all mind if I contributed?" Well, they practically fell over themselves saying yes. And just like that, I had my invitation to get closer to Samuel's new life. Because, honey, if there's one thing I learned in all my years, it's that the best way to take someone down is from the inside, and I was about to serve my revenge with a side of homemade apple pie. Well, honey, let me tell you about making apple pies with murder in your heart. Turns out, the crust comes out flakier that way. I spent all Friday in that hotel kitchenette, making 3 of my famous apple pies, the ones that won the county fair blue ribbon 4 years running back in Cedar Falls. Every slice of apple I cut, I imagined it was another one of Samuel's lies. Every pinch of cinnamon was seasoned with 18 years of grief. By the time them pies were cooling on the counter, they looked like heaven and smelled like home. But baby, they were baked with pure revenge. Saturday morning came bright and cheerful, one of them perfect Colorado fall days that makes you understand why people move out here. I put on my nice church dress, the navy one with little flowers that Lila bought me for Mother's Day, and drove to Thornton Presbyterian with my pies in the back seat, practicing my sweet old lady smile in the rearview mirror. You'd be surprised how easy it is to look harmless when you're 62 with gray hair and carrying baked goods. The church fellowship hall was all decorated with fall leaves and them little pumpkins, tables set up with everybody's contributions. I found Doris right away. That woman could talk the ears off a cornstalk, and she just about hugged me to death when she saw them pies. "Oh, Clara, these look amazing. Daniel Harper's gonna love these. Apple pie is his absolute favorite." I bet it is, I thought, remembering how he used to beg me to make them every Sunday after church. And then, like God himself was directing this show, in walked Samuel with his perfect little family. Rebecca was wearing one of them sweater sets that cost more than my monthly grocery bill, and the kids were all dressed up nice like catalog models. Samuel, I still couldn't think of him as Daniel, was glad-handing everybody, playing the role of church pillar and family man. Made me want to throw one of them pies right at his lying face. But I didn't. No, ma'am. I played my part perfect. When Doris dragged me over to meet him, I put on my best stranger's smile and stuck out my hand. Clara Wilson, I said, using my maiden name. Just visiting from Iowa. And honey, you should have seen his face. For just a second, just a heartbeat, I saw pure terror flash in his eyes. The same eyes that used to look at me over morning coffee, that promised to love me forever, that I'd closed with my fingers when I thought he was dead. He recovered quick, I'll give him that. Shook my hand like we'd never met, like I hadn't spent 22 years washing his dirty underwear and listening to him complain about school board meetings. Daniel Harper, he said, smooth as butter. Welcome to Thornton Presbyterian. I hope you enjoy your visit. His hand was sweating, though. After all these years, I still knew his tells. Rebecca didn't suspect a thing, bless her heart. She complimented my dress, asked about my sister in Denver, even invited me to sit with them during the service tomorrow. We love meeting new people, she said, all bright smiles and Christian charity. The kids were polite too, called me ma'am and everything. The boy, his name was Tyler, even helped me carry the pies to the dessert table. Sweet kid. Shame his daddy was a lying snake who'd built their whole life on my grave. I spent that whole bake sale watching Samuel squirm. Every time I got near him, he'd find somewhere else to be. When I bought a plate of cookies from the youth group table, he suddenly needed to help move chairs. When I complimented the choir director on the music, he remembered something urgent in the parking lot. It was like watching a cat trying to avoid a bath. And honey, I was enjoying every minute of it. But the best part came when they started the pie auction. See, at church bake sales, they always auction off the best stuff to raise extra money, and wouldn't you know it, my pies were the hit of the day. The bidding went up, and I watched Samuel's face get paler and paler as folks kept talking about how amazing they looked. Finally, Doris announced, and Daniel Harper wins the bidding for Clara's blue ribbon apple pie. The look on his face when he had to come up and accept that pie from my hands. Honey, it was worth every tear I'd cried. Thank you so much, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. But when he got close, he whispered, "What are you doing here?" And I whispered back, "Sweet as that pie. Just visiting, Daniel. Just like you're just living." After the sale, I helped clean up because that's what good church ladies do. Stacked chairs with the other volunteers, wrapped up leftover cookies, swept the floor. Normal things that felt surreal when you're doing them in your dead husband's church. Rebecca even hugged me goodbye, said she hoped to see me tomorrow at service. "You remind me of someone," she said, tilting her head. "Have we met before?" "I just have one of those faces," I told her. "People always think they know me from somewhere." She laughed and agreed, never knowing she was hugging the woman whose life she'd stolen. Though truth be told, watching her with Samuel, seeing how he kept looking at the exits like a trapped animal, I was starting to think maybe she was as much a victim as I was. You can't build a real marriage on a foundation of lies, no matter how pretty the house on top looks. That night, Samuel called my hotel. Don't ask me how he found out where I was staying. Probably had connections from his real estate business. "Clara," he said. And Lord, hearing him say my real name after all these years made my chest tight. "We need to talk." "No," I said, calm as a lake at dawn. "We don't. You had 18 years to talk. You chose to be dead instead." "Please," he said, and I could hear the desperation creeping in. "I can explain everything. Just meet me somewhere. Not here. Rebecca doesn't know. The kids don't know. Please." "Your kids don't know their daddy's a bigamist and a fraud?" I asked, sweet as honey. "How interesting. Wonder what else they don't know about good old Daniel Harper." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "What do you want, Clara?" And you know what? I still didn't have a good answer for that. Part of me wanted to destroy him, sure. Part of me wanted to march into that church tomorrow and announce to everyone that Daniel Harper was really Samuel Mitchell, not a widower, but a wife abandoner, not a pillar of the community, but a man who'd faked his own death rather than face a divorce. But another part of me, a part I didn't want to admit existed, just wanted to understand why. Why he'd chosen this instead of just leaving like a normal person. Why he'd put me through hell when he could have just asked for his freedom. "I want to know why," I finally said. "I want to look you in the eye and hear why you did this to me. To Lila. To us." He agreed to meet me Monday morning at a park outside town. Neutral ground, he called it. like we were warring countries negotiating a treaty instead of a husband and wife, or whatever we were now, trying to make sense of the wreckage between us. I hung up without saying goodbye, then sat on that hotel bed for a good long while, wondering what Monday would bring. But first, I had to get through Sunday. And honey, if you think Saturday was interesting, you ain't heard nothing yet. Sugar, there's something about sitting in a church pew, knowing you're about to watch your dead husband play Jesus-loving family man, that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the good Lord's sense of humor. But there I was, Sunday morning, dressed in my best church outfit, the purple one with the matching hat that Lila always said made me look like royalty, sitting 3 rows behind Samuel and his picture-perfect family. The sanctuary was beautiful, all stained glass and polished wood, nothing like our little church back in Cedar Falls where the roof leaked every spring and the piano was always just a little bit out of tune. Rebecca sat next to Samuel, her hand on his knee during the opening prayer, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Honey, that man never liked being touched during church, used to say it distracted him from the sermon. Guess Daniel Harper had different preferences than Samuel Mitchell. When it came time for the church announcements, the pastor, a young fellow with one of them hipster beards, actually thanked Daniel Harper and his lovely family for their years of service to the congregation. Years of service. While I was laying flowers on an empty grave every Memorial Day, he was serving communion and teaching Sunday school. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. But the real kicker came during the prayer requests. This sweet old lady named Ethel stood up and asked for prayers for her nephew who was struggling with depression. Sometimes people feel so trapped they think the only way out is to disappear, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. But we need to remember that suicide is never the answer. I watched Samuel's shoulders tense up like someone had poured ice water down his back. The pastor added, "That's right, Ethel. And let's remember that those left behind suffer the most. The families never really recover from that kind of loss." Well, honey, I couldn't help myself. When the pastor asked if anyone else had prayer requests, my hand shot up like I was back in grade school. "I'd like to request prayers for families who've lost someone to suicide," I said, standing up nice and slow so everyone could see me. Or at least, families who think they lost someone that way. Sometimes the not knowing is worse than the grieving. You could have heard a pin drop in that sanctuary. Samuel turned around so fast I thought his neck might snap, his face white as communion bread. I just smiled at him, sweet as Sunday morning, then sat back down. Rebecca was looking between us with this confused expression, like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. The pastor, bless his heart, just nodded and added my request to the list, though he looked a bit puzzled himself. After the service, during coffee hour, I made sure to mingle, told everyone how nice their church was, how welcoming, how it reminded me of my church back home where my late husband used to teach Sunday school before he passed. I watched Samuel try to hustle his family out early, but Rebecca wasn't having it. She was one of them social butterflies, flitting from group to group, introducing me to everyone as Clara from Iowa who makes those amazing pies. That's when I met Martha Henderson. No relation to my neighbor back home, just one of those coincidences that make life interesting. Martha was the church historian, been attending Thornton Presbyterian for 40 years, knew everybody's business, and wasn't shy about sharing it. Daniel Harper's such an inspiration, she told me over coffee and store-bought cookies that couldn't hold a candle to my snickerdoodles. Moving here after his first wife died, starting over with Rebecca, and those beautiful children. Though you know, she lowered her voice like she was sharing state secrets. He never talks about his first wife, won't even tell anyone her name. Rebecca says he's still too hurt by the loss. Too hurt by the loss. I had to excuse myself to the ladies' room before I said something I'd regret. Stood in front of that mirror looking at my face, the one that had aged 18 years thinking he was dead, and laughed until I cried, or maybe cried until I laughed. Hard to tell the difference when your whole life's been turned upside down like a snow globe. When I came back out, Samuel was waiting in the hallway, just standing there, looking like a man facing his own execution. "We need to leave," he said, quiet-like. "Right now. Meet me at the park in an hour." "Tomorrow," I reminded him. "You said tomorrow." "Clara, please," he said, and for just a second, he sounded like my Samuel again. The one who'd begged me to marry him in my mama's garden, who'd cried when Lila was born, who'd held my hand through my daddy's funeral. I can't do this. Can't stand here in God's house with you watching me like that. Like what? I asked, innocent as a newborn lamb. Like your wife? Oh wait, that's right. According to everyone here, I'm dead. Must be awkward having a ghost at coffee hour. He actually flinched at that. Good. I wanted him to flinch. Wanted him to feel just a fraction of what I'd felt all these years. 1 hour, he said again, then walked away like the coward he'd always been, leaving me standing in that church hallway with the taste of bitter coffee and righteousness in my mouth. I didn't go to the park in an hour. Didn't go in 2 hours neither. Instead, I drove around Thornton, looking at this town that had welcomed my husband when he was running from his life. It was nice enough, I suppose. Clean streets, good schools, the kind of place where people felt safe raising their kids. The kind of place where a man could reinvent himself, become someone new, someone better than who he'd been before, or at least pretend to. My phone rang around 3 o'clock. Lila, Mama, I'm worried about you, she said without preamble. You shouldn't be doing this alone. Let me fly out there. Let me help. Baby girl, I said, pulling over to the side of the road because talking to her always made me emotional. I need to do this myself. Need to look him in the eye and get my answers without anyone else there. You understand? She was quiet for a moment, then said, I've been thinking about all those years I blame myself. All that therapy. All those nights wondering what I did wrong to make him want to die. Her voice cracked a little. He owes us more than answers, Mama. He owes us years. I know, baby. I know. And I did know. But I also knew that you can't collect on that kind of debt. Can't get back time that's already gone. All you can do is try to understand why it was stolen from you in the first place, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to make peace with the theft. That evening, I ordered room service, first time in my life, felt fancy as a movie star, and sat in my hotel room watching the sun set over the mountains. Tomorrow I'd finally talk to Samuel. Really talk to him, for the first time in 18 years. Part of me was dreading it, but another part, a bigger part than I wanted to admit, was almost looking forward to it. Because here's the thing about carrying questions around for that long. Sometimes getting answers, even bad ones, is better than wondering forever. I called Jessica the lawyer before bed, updated her on everything. She told me Colorado was a one-party consent state, which meant I could record our conversation tomorrow if I wanted. Might be useful, she said. All business. For the case. But as I lay in that hotel bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a strange city, I wasn't thinking about cases or lawsuits or revenge. I was thinking about a young couple in Cedar Falls, dancing in their kitchen while dinner burned on the stove, laughing at their own clumsiness, believing they'd have forever to get it right. And I was wondering if that couple had ever really existed at all, or if I'd just been dancing alone all along. Sugar! There's something about sitting in a church pew, knowing you're about to watch your dead husband play Jesus-loving family man, that makes you question everything you thought you knew about the good Lord's sense of humor. But there I was, Sunday morning, dressed in my best church outfit, the purple one with the matching hat that Lila always said made me look like royalty, sitting 3 rows behind Samuel and his picture-perfect family. The sanctuary was beautiful, all stained glass and polished wood, nothing like our little church back in Cedar Falls, where the roof leaked every spring and the piano was always just a little bit out of tune. Rebecca sat next to Samuel, her hand on his knee during the opening prayer, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. Honey, that man never liked being touched during church. Used to say it distracted him from the sermon. Guess Daniel Harper had different preferences than Samuel Mitchell. When it came time for the church announcements, the pastor, a young fellow with one of them hipster beards, actually thanked Daniel Harper and his lovely family for their years of service to the congregation. Years of service. While I was laying flowers on an empty grave every Memorial Day, he was serving communion and teaching Sunday school. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast. But the real kicker came during the prayer requests. This sweet old lady named Ethel stood up and asked for prayers for her nephew who was struggling with depression. Sometimes people feel so trapped, they think the only way out is to disappear, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. But we need to remember that suicide is never the answer. I watched Samuel's shoulders tense up like someone had poured ice water down his back. The pastor added, "That's right, Ethel. And let's remember that those left behind suffer the most. The families never really recover from that kind of loss." Well, honey, I couldn't help myself. When the pastor asked if anyone else had prayer requests, my hand shot up like I was back in grade school. "I'd like to request prayers for families who've lost someone to suicide," I said, standing up nice and slow so everyone could see me. Or at least, families who think they lost someone that way. Sometimes the not knowing is worse than the grieving. You could have heard a pin drop in that sanctuary. Samuel turned around so fast I thought his neck might snap, his face white as communion bread. I just smiled at him, sweet as Sunday morning, then sat back down. Rebecca was looking between us with this confused expression, like she was trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. The pastor, bless his heart, just nodded and added my request to the list, though he looked a bit puzzled himself. After the service, during coffee hour, I made sure to mingle. Told everyone how nice their church was, how welcoming, how it reminded me of my church back home, where my late husband used to teach Sunday school before he passed. I watched Samuel try to hustle his family out early, but Rebecca wasn't having it. She was one of them social butterflies, flitting from group to group, introducing me to everyone as Clara from Iowa, who makes those amazing pies. That's when I met Martha Henderson. No relation to my neighbor back home, just one of those coincidences that make life interesting. Martha was the church historian, been attending Thornton Presbyterian for 40 years, knew everybody's business, and wasn't shy about sharing it. "Daniel Harper's such an inspiration," she told me over coffee and store-bought cookies that couldn't hold a candle to my snickerdoodles. Moving here after his first wife died, starting over with Rebecca and those beautiful children. Though you know, she lowered her voice like she was sharing state secrets, he never talks about his first wife, won't even tell anyone her name. Rebecca says he's still too hurt by the loss, too hurt by the loss. I had to excuse myself to the ladies' room before I said something I'd regret. Stood in front of that mirror looking at my face, the one that had aged 18 years thinking he was dead, and laughed until I cried. Or maybe cried until I laughed. Hard to tell the difference when your whole life's been turned upside down like a snow globe. When I came back out, Samuel was waiting in the hallway, just standing there, looking like a man facing his own execution. "We need to leave," he said quiet-like. "Right now. Meet me at the park in an hour." "Tomorrow," I reminded him. "You said tomorrow." "Clara, please," he said. And for just a second, he sounded like my Samuel again. The one who'd begged me to marry him in my mama's garden, who'd cried when Lila was born, who'd held my hand through my daddy's funeral. "I can't do this. Can't stand here in God's house with you watching me like that." "Like what?" I asked, innocent as a newborn lamb. "Like your wife? Oh wait, that's right. According to everyone here, I'm dead. Must be awkward having a ghost at coffee hour." He actually flinched at that. Good. I wanted him to flinch. Wanted him to feel just a fraction of what I'd felt all these years. "1 hour," he said again, then walked away like the coward he'd always been, leaving me standing in that church hallway with the taste of bitter coffee and righteousness in my mouth. I didn't go to the park in an hour. Didn't go in 2 hours neither. Instead, I drove around Thornton, looking at this town that had welcomed my husband when he was running from his life. It was nice enough, I suppose. Clean streets, good schools, the kind of place where people felt safe raising their kids. The kind of place where a man could reinvent himself, become someone new, someone better than who he'd been before. Or at least pretend to. My phone rang around 3 o'clock. Lila. "Mama, I'm worried about you," she said without preamble. "You shouldn't be doing this alone. Let me fly out there. Let me help." "Baby girl," I said, pulling over to the side of the road because talking to her always made me emotional. "I need to do this myself. Need to look him in the eye and get my answers without anyone else there. You understand?" She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I've been thinking about all those years I blame myself, all that therapy, all those nights wondering what I did wrong to make him want to die." Her voice cracked a little. "He owes us more than answers, Mama. He owes us years." "I know, baby. I know. And I did know. But I also knew that you can't collect on that kind of debt. Can't get back time that's already gone. All you can do is try to understand why it was stolen from you in the first place, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to make peace with the theft. That evening, I ordered room service, first time in my life, felt fancy as a movie star, and sat in my hotel room watching the sun set over the mountains. Tomorrow I'd finally talk to Samuel. Really talk to him, for the first time in 18 years. Part of me was dreading it, but another part, a bigger part than I wanted to admit, was almost looking forward to it. Because here's the thing about carrying questions around for that long. Sometimes getting answers, even bad ones, is better than wondering forever. I called Jessica the lawyer before bed, updated her on everything. She told me Colorado was a one-party consent state, which meant I could record our conversation tomorrow if I wanted. Might be useful, she said. All business. For the case. But as I lay in that hotel bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a strange city, I wasn't thinking about cases or lawsuits or revenge. I was thinking about a young couple in Cedar Falls, dancing in their kitchen while dinner burned on the stove, laughing at their own clumsiness, believing they'd have forever to get it right. And I was wondering if that couple had ever really existed at all, or if I'd just been dancing alone all along. Honey, let me tell you what happened after I left Samuel standing in that park like a lost puppy. I drove back to my hotel and just sat in that parking lot for must have been an hour, watching the rain make little rivers on the windshield. My phone kept buzzing, Lila checking on me, Jessica the lawyer wanting updates, even my neighbor Diane texting to ask how my visit with my sister was going. But I couldn't answer none of them yet, couldn't find the words to explain that I'd just had coffee with my dead husband, and he'd apologized like that could fix 18 years of lies. That night, I did something I hadn't done since Samuel disappeared. I got myself good and drunk. Not falling down drunk, mind you. Just enough wine from the hotel bar to make the edges of everything a little softer. The bartender, sweet young thing named Marcus, probably thought I was some sad old lady drowning her sorrows. Wasn't far from the truth, I suppose, except my sorrows had turned out to be swimming just fine in Colorado. The next morning, with a headache reminding me why I don't drink like that anymore, I called Jessica, told her everything, the conversation, the recording I'd made, how Samuel had built this whole life on the foundation of my grief. She listened like lawyers do, all professional and taking notes. I could hear her scribbling, then laid out my options clear as day. You could destroy him, she said, matter of fact like she was listing grocery items. File charges for fraud, bigamy, identity theft. He'd probably get jail time, definitely lose his real estate license. His marriage to Rebecca would be void. Those kids would find out their whole life is a lie. She paused, then added, or you could use this as leverage. Get a proper divorce, finally. Get what you're owed financially. Make him pay for Lila's therapy, your pain and suffering. Clean him out, but let him keep playing Daniel Harper. I sat with that for a while, honey. Felt the weight of that power, holding someone's whole life in my hands the way he'd once held mine. It was tempting, I won't lie. Part of me wanted to march into that pretty Presbyterian church and announce to everyone that their beloved Daniel Harper was nothing but a lying, family-abandoning fraud. Wanted to see Rebecca's face when she realized the man she'd been sleeping next to for 18 years was legally married to someone else. Wanted them kids to know their daddy was a coward who'd chosen them over his first family. But then I thought about them kids. Tyler and Madison, their names were. I'd learned that at the church, heard folks talking about how Tyler was hoping for a baseball scholarship, how Madison was first chair violin in the school orchestra. Good kids who didn't ask to be born into a lie. Kids who loved their daddy the way Lila used to love hers, before she spent years in therapy thinking she'd driven him to suicide. That's when I made my decision. Not for Samuel. Lord knows he didn't deserve my mercy. Not even for Rebecca, though I'd started feeling sorry for her in a way I hadn't expected. But for them kids, and for Lila, and maybe even for myself. Because, honey, I'd learned something important in that park. Samuel might have stolen 18 years from me, but I didn't have to let him steal another day. Revenge might taste sweet going down, but it leaves a bitter aftertaste that lasts forever. So I called Samuel. Used the number he'd given me, probably one of them burner phones like drug dealers use on TV. Meet me at the coffee shop on Main Street, I told him. Bring your checkbook. We're gonna settle this like adults. He showed up looking like he hadn't slept in days, which made us even. We sat in a corner booth far from the windows, and I laid out my terms, simple and clear. I wanted a divorce, a real one this time, all legal and proper. I wanted financial compensation for all them years of struggling, enough to make sure I could retire comfortable and help Lila if she ever needed it. I wanted him to pay for every penny of therapy Lila had needed, with interest. And I wanted him to write her a letter. A real letter, not some weak excuse, explaining why he'd done what he'd done, taking full responsibility. But here's what I'm offering in return, I told him, stirring my coffee slow and deliberate. I keep your secret. Rebecca doesn't find out. Them kids keep their daddy. You get to stay Daniel Harper, pillar of the community. I go back to Iowa and we pretend this never happened. Except for the legal stuff, of course. That gets done quiet and proper through lawyers. You should have seen the relief on his face, honey. Like I'd just commuted his death sentence, which I guess in a way I had. He agreed to everything, even offered more money than I'd asked for, which told me he'd been doing pretty well for himself in the real estate business. We worked out the details right there over coffee and pie. Not my pie, of course, but some store-bought thing that tasted like cardboard and regret. Why? He asked when we were finishing up. Why not destroy me? I deserve it. I thought about that for a minute, really thought about it. Because, I finally said, I've spent 18 years letting what you did define my life. Letting your ghost haunt every corner of my house, every holiday, every family gathering. If I destroy you now, I'll spend the next 18 years dealing with the fallout. Lawyers, court dates, publicity, watching them kids suffer, watching Rebecca's world fall apart. And for what? So I can feel righteous for a hot minute? I stood up then, left money on the table for my coffee even though he tried to pay. You know what the funny thing is? I said, looking down at him. All them years you were gone, I built you up in my mind, made you into this tragic figure, this poor tortured soul who couldn't face life anymore. But seeing you now, seeing what you really are, just a selfish man who wanted a do-over, it's almost a relief. Because now I can finally bury you proper. Not the fantasy I've been mourning, but the real you. The coward who ran away. I walked out of that coffee shop feeling lighter than I had in years. Called Jessica from the car, told her to draw up the papers. Called Lila and told her I'd gotten what we needed, that her daddy was going to pay for all the hurt he'd caused, literally and figuratively. Didn't tell her about the letter yet. Figured that was her choice to read or not when it came. The next day, I did one last thing before leaving Colorado. Drove by his house one more time, saw Rebecca out front watering them fancy flowers she had in window boxes. She looked happy, content, living her life not knowing it was built on quicksand. Part of me felt guilty for keeping her in the dark, but then I figured some truths are too heavy to force on people. If she ever found out, it wouldn't be from me. I'd given her the gift of ignorance, which was more than Samuel had given me. On the plane ride home, I stared out that little window at the clouds and thought about forgiveness, not for Samuel. He hadn't earned that and probably never would, but for myself. For not seeing the signs, for believing the lie, for spending 18 years as a ghost in my own life. Because here's the thing about betrayal, honey. It's not just what they do to you, it's what you do to yourself afterward. And I was done, finally done, punishing myself for Samuel's sins. Sugar, let me tell you about the letter that came 3 weeks after I got back to Cedar Falls. I'd been trying to get back to normal, whatever normal means when you find out your dead husband's been living it up in Colorado, tending my garden, going to water aerobics with Marge, pretending like I hadn't just blown up my whole understanding of the last 18 years. The divorce papers were moving through the lawyers quiet-like, and Samuel had already started sending them checks he'd promised. I thought we were done, thought I'd closed that chapter neat and clean. But then came this thick envelope in my mailbox. No return address, but I knew that handwriting anywhere. Inside was 2 letters, one addressed to me, one to Lila, with "Please give this to her" written on the front. My hands shook something fierce as I opened mine, and honey, What I read just about knocked me off my feet all over again. It started out like you'd expect. More apologies than a politician caught with his hand in the cookie jar. But then it got into something I wasn't expecting. The truth about why he'd really left. See, turns out Samuel hadn't told me everything in that park. The man had been diagnosed with depression 2 years before he disappeared. Been seeing a therapist in Des Moines on the sly because he didn't want folks in Cedar Falls to know. The therapist had him on medication, but Samuel said it made him feel like he was watching his life through a dirty window. There, but not really there. He wrote about how he'd stand in front of his classroom, teaching them kids about photosynthesis and cell division, and feel like he was already dead inside. How he'd come home to our nice house and our good life and feel like he was suffocating under the weight of being Samuel Mitchell, husband and father and respectable member of the community. How some days he'd drive to that lake, yes, that lake, and sit there for hours trying to work up the courage to drive in for real. Now, honey, I know what you're thinking. Depression don't give nobody the right to fake their death and abandon their family. And you're right. But reading about how close he'd come to actually doing it, how he'd written suicide notes he never sent, how he'd picked out hymns for his funeral, it made my chest tight in ways I hadn't expected. The man was sicker than I'd ever known, and too proud or too scared to tell me about it. Then came the part about Rebecca. She wasn't just some woman he'd met online. She was someone from a depression support group, someone who understood what he was going through because she'd been there herself. They'd started talking because they were both teachers, both struggling, both trying to find reasons to keep going. When she got pregnant, it wasn't some ultimatum like he'd made it sound. She'd tried to kill herself twice before, and finding out about the baby had saved her life. She'd begged Samuel to come be with her because she was scared of what she might do alone. So he made his choice. Save Rebecca and the baby, or stay with us and maybe end up at the bottom of that lake for real. He chose them. And honey, reading it all laid out like that, I could almost understand it. Almost. But understanding and forgiving, well, those are two different animals entirely. The letter went on about how he'd wanted to write us so many times, how he'd started hundreds of letters over the years but couldn't never find the right words, how he'd kept tabs on us through the Cedar Falls newspaper online, crying when he read my daddy's obituary and knowing he couldn't come comfort me, how proud he was when Lila got her doctorate, how he'd sat in his car outside her graduation ceremony, watching from the parking lot because he couldn't miss it, but couldn't show his face neither. But here's the part that really got me. He wrote about the night before he left. How he'd stood in our bedroom doorway watching me sleep, memorizing my face. How he'd gone into Lila's room and kissed her forehead, whispering apologies she couldn't hear. How he'd walked through our house touching things. The kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals, the couch where we'd watch TV every evening, the garden gate that still squeaked no matter how much WD-40 he used on it. Said it was the hardest thing he'd ever done, leaving us, but staying would have been harder. Then came the kicker, the part that had me reaching for the tissues I swore I wouldn't need. He'd left us more than just pain. He'd left us money. Turns out, all them years ago, before he disappeared, he'd taken out a second life insurance policy with some company I'd never heard of, one that would pay out even without a body after 7 years. But the beneficiary wasn't me or Lila. It was his sister in California, with instructions to give it to us after enough time had passed. She'd been sending checks to a P.O. box in Cedar Falls for years, thinking she was honoring her dead brother's wishes. I sat with that letter for 3 days before I opened the one for Lila. Didn't read it. That wasn't my place. But I held it, turned it over in my hands, wondered if I should burn it or mail it or what. Finally called her up, told her about the letter. She drove down from Portland that very weekend, and we sat at my kitchen table, the same one Samuel had touched that last night, while she read what her daddy had to say. Honey, watching your daughter read a letter from the father she thought was dead, there ain't words for that kind of pain. She cried, of course, got angry, crumpled it up, smoothed it out, read it again. Then she looked at me with them eyes that were so much like his and said, "He was sick, Mama, really sick." And I nodded, because what else could I do? Mental illness might explain things, but it don't erase them. We talked until the sun came up, about depression and choices and the weight of carrying other people's secrets, about how Samuel had chose wrong, no doubt about it, but maybe he chose the only way he could see at the time, about how Rebecca and them kids were victims too, in their own way, living with a man who was only half there because the other half was always gonna be with us. Lila decided she wanted to write him back, not to reconcile, but to say her piece, to tell him about all them years of therapy, all the guilt she'd carried, all the ways his death had shaped her life, to let him know she was okay now, despite everything, maybe even because of everything, that she'd learned to be strong because she'd had to be, learned to trust carefully because trust could be broken so completely. As for that money from the insurance policy his sister had been sending, turned out it was sitting in an account at the bank in Cedar Falls, over $100,000 just waiting. The bank manager, bless his heart, had been wondering for years about this account that just grew and grew with no withdrawals. We split it, Lila and me, and I won't lie, it felt like justice, getting that money. Not because it fixed anything, but because it was proof that somewhere in his messed up mind, Samuel had tried to take care of us the only way he knew how. But here's the thing that really got me thinking. If Samuel had just told me about the depression, about feeling trapped, about Rebecca and the baby and all of it, would I have let him go? Would I have understood that sometimes loving someone means letting them leave? Or would I have tried to fix him, to hold on tighter, to make him stay until he ended up in that lake for real? There ain't no good answer to that, honey. Just questions that'll follow me to my own grave, whenever that comes. That night, after Lila left to drive back to Portland, I sat in my garden, even though it was getting cold. Sat there thinking about mental illness and choices and the stories we tell ourselves to survive. About how Samuel had written himself a new life because he couldn't bear the old one, and how I'd written myself a tragedy because I couldn't bear to think he'd chosen to leave. Both of us spinning stories, both of us trying to make sense of something that maybe just didn't make sense at all. Well, honey, here we are at the end of this long, strange journey. And let me tell you what happened after all that dust settled. It's been a year now since I found that birthday card under my door. A year since my dead husband came back to life, just long enough to break my heart in a whole new way. But you know what? I'm still here, still standing. And that's more than I thought I'd be able to say when this whole mess started. The divorce went through quiet as a church mouse, just like we'd planned. Samuel, I can't bring myself to call him Daniel, never could. He kept his word about the money, sent every penny he'd promised, and then some. Even set up a fund for any future grandkids Lila might have, which was more than I'd asked for. Guess guilt makes people generous, or maybe he was just trying to buy his way to a clear conscience. Either way, I took that money and didn't feel one bit bad about it. Lila, bless her heart, she's doing better than I could have hoped. She wrote her daddy that letter, said her piece about all the hurt and the healing, and then she did something that surprised us both. She forgave him. Not for his sake, she was real clear about that, but for hers. Said carrying all that anger was like trying to swim with rocks in her pockets, and she was ready to let them go. She's engaged now to that nice boy from Portland, marine biologist like her, and they're planning a small wedding next spring. She asked me if I thought she should invite Samuel, and I told her that was her choice to make, not mine. Don't know what she'll decide, and honestly, I'm okay with not knowing. As for me, well, I sold the house on Maple Street. Too many ghosts in them walls, too many memories good and bad, all twisted up together like kudzu vines. Bought myself a nice little cottage closer to downtown, with a screened-in porch where I can sit and watch the world go by without the world watching me back. Started fresh with new furniture, new pictures on the walls, even new dishes that Samuel never ate off of. It's smaller than the old place, but it's all mine, and honey, that makes it just about perfect. I kept going to water aerobics with Marge, and wouldn't you know it, I made some new friends there. Women who'd been through their own troubles, divorce, death, disappointment, all the D's that life throws at you when you're not looking. We started having coffee after class, then lunch, then pretty soon we had ourselves a regular support group without even meaning to. Turns out, when you stop being poor Clara whose husband killed himself, you can start being just Clara, and just Clara is pretty good company. The strangest thing happened about 6 months ago. I got a letter from Rebecca, Samuel's Rebecca. She'd found out the truth, not from me but from some paperwork mishap at the county clerk's office when they went to refinance their house. Turns out you can't refinance a house when your marriage ain't legal, and computers these days, they catch everything. She wrote to apologize, said she'd had no idea, said she was sorry for my pain. Also said she was leaving him, taking the kids, starting over in Arizona where her sister lived. Couldn't stay with a man who'd lied about something that big, she said, and I couldn't blame her one bit. I wrote her back, told her she didn't owe me no apology, that we were both victims of Samuel's need to rewrite his life story. We've kept in touch a little, strange as that sounds. Two women bound together by the same man's lies, trying to make sense of it all. She told me the kids are doing okay, considering. They know the truth now, and they're angry, hurt, confused. All the things they got a right to be. But they're young, resilient. They'll heal. Just like Lila did, just like I am. Samuel wrote me one last time after Rebecca left him. Said he was living alone in an apartment in Denver, going to therapy for real this time, trying to understand why he'd made the choices he'd made. Said losing everything had taught him what he should have known all along. That you can't build happiness on a foundation of lies, can't run from yourself no matter how far you go or what name you use. He asked if I could ever forgive him, and honey, I sat with that letter for a long time before I answered. What I told him was this: forgiveness ain't mine to give or withhold. He's got to forgive himself if he can, and that's between him and his conscience and whatever God he believes in. But I told him I was letting go of the anger, the hurt, the 18 years of grief that turned out to be for nothing. Not for his sake, but for mine, because I've learned something important this past year. Holding on to poison just means you're the one who stays sick. These days, I wake up in my little cottage and make coffee in my new kitchen and tend my small garden out back. I've got tomatoes growing again, big beautiful ones that taste like summer. I volunteer at the library, reading to kids on Tuesday afternoons, and I've even started dating. Nothing serious, just coffee with a nice widower from church who makes me laugh and doesn't mind that I've got more baggage than an airport carousel. The funny thing is, I'm happier now than I was before that birthday card showed up. Not because of what happened, but because of who I became because of it. That woman who flew to Colorado to confront her not-dead husband? Who sat in his church eating cookies and plotting justice? Who chose mercy over revenge because it was the harder but better path? I'm proud of her. She's tougher than the woman who spent 18 years mourning a ghost. Smarter than the woman who didn't see the signs. Braver than the woman who was afraid to go down to her own cellar. Sometimes I think about parallel lives. About the Clara who never got that birthday card. Who went on believing her husband was dead. Who never got answers to all them questions that haunted her. I feel sorry for that Clara, living with a beautiful lie instead of the ugly truth. Because here's what I learned, honey. The truth might hurt like hell, but lies, even pretty ones, they hurt worse in the long run. They eat you up from the inside, leave you hollow, make you doubt everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world. So here I am, 63 years old, starting over in ways I never imagined. Got my cottage, got my friends, got my daughter planning a wedding and talking about babies someday. Got a bank account with my name only on it and a future that's all mine to shape. Some mornings I still wake up and reach for Samuel out of habit. 30-some years of muscle memory don't fade overnight. But then I remember. He's not dead. Just gone. And that's exactly where he needs to be. If you're listening to this story, honey, maybe you've got your own ghosts. Your own 18 years of carrying something that's weighing you down. Maybe someone you trusted broke that trust in ways you never saw coming. Maybe you're standing at your own cellar door, afraid to go down and face whatever truth is hiding in the dark. All I can tell you is this. Go down them stairs. Open that box. Read that letter. Make that phone call. The truth might hurt, but it won't kill you. And once you know it, once you really know it, you can start deciding what to do with it. Because that's the secret, sugar. They can lie to you, leave you, break your heart into so many pieces, you don't think you'll ever find them all. But they can't decide what you do next. That's your choice, your power, your story to write. And if a 63-year-old woman from Cedar Falls, Iowa can start over, can face down her not-dead husband and choose her own path forward, Well, honey, so can you. This is how I learned that sometimes the dead coming back to life ain't a miracle. It's a chance to bury them proper and finally move on. If my story touched your heart, if it made you think about your own cellar doors and the truths hiding behind them, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because every woman carrying 18 years of somebody else's lies deserves to know she can set them down. I'm still here, still standing, still growing them tomatoes, and I want to hear your story too. We're stronger than we know, honey. Every last one of us.